welcome. My name is Ilana Horn. I go by Lonnie. I am at Vanderbilt University and part of the CADRE leadership team. And this is part of the learning series we've been doing in this cycle of CADRE. And today we are really delighted to have three great scholars with us who do work in rural schools and rural partnerships. We have Julie Amador in my closed caption box. Okay, I had to move it. Julie Amador from University of Idaho, and Rebecca Sansom from Brigham Young, and Ryan Summers from University of North Dakota. So they are going to be sharing some about their work, not only the research, but some of the nitty gritty of how they do their work in partnership in rural communities. So we're going to start with a really brief overview of what rural partnership work is. What do we mean by it? Why is it important? And then we're going to go through each of the three presenters. They'll have about 15 minutes. There's a Q&A box in the chat. If you have a substantive question that you want to be addressed by anybody on the panel, please go ahead and put it in there. If it's just an informational question, we'll probably answer it in the box as we're presenting. If it is, if it's something that's more substantive, we might save it for the discussion that we will have at the end. So rural schools, and I picked up this bucolic slide image of rural communities because I think that's sort of what people think of when they think of rural, or at least people in who don't live in rural communities. We sort of have this romantic ideas about what rural means, but honestly, there's not one single definition of rural. And according to something I read in preparation for this webinar, the federal government has about 15 different definitions of rural. So we don't even fully know always what we mean. It has something to do with population density. It has something to do with resources. And the other thing to know about rural schools and rural communities is that we often think of white people, working class people, farmers, but rural communities include a lot of diverse populations. They can include states like Alaska and Hawaii, where the rural communities aren't necessarily white. For example, we can have Inuit people and Native Hawaiian people. So we have to kind of broaden, I think, a lot of our popular imagination of what rural means. We also have communities like rural Mississippi or rural Arkansas, which are often largely African-American, or there are largely African-American communities there. But it's interesting because about a third of US schools are rural, but they don't get talked about very much in the research literature. We devote a lot of time to urban schools, to suburban schools, but we don't have a really robust literature yet on rural schools, even though we have quite a number of students who attend them. About a fifth of US students are in rural schools. One of the things, a consequence of the lack of research that we have on rural schools and communities, is that policy is often made in state capitals, which are often in populous areas and don't really match the infrastructure needs, et cetera, of how rural communities are organized. So there's this big gap between how education might be organized at the state level and what rural communities actually need. So there's really an urgent need for the kind of partnership scholarship that our panelists today are doing. And NSF realizes this, and since 1979, they've had this program called EPSCoR, and it stands for Established Program to Support Competitive Research. We can give notes on that. What is it called? What's that called? My words sometimes fail me. That abbreviation, I'm not sure how good it is, but it's what it's called. And the idea is to invest in rural communities, to catalyze research capabilities, broaden impacts, establish research infrastructure, and impact R&D and economic development. So NSF has created a priority around rural communities, recognizing that there are needs that aren't being met. And they have identified, and this changes from time to time, states and territories that are considered EPSCoR states. And you can see that most of our panelists are from EPSCoR states, although I was surprised, Rebecca, that Utah is not an EPSCoR state. I don't know why, but it probably has to do with these competing definitions of rural or something, or how much research funding comes in. I don't really know the nitty gritty of what gets somebody called an EPSCoR state or not. But that means that these states and territories, which include Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Virgin Islands, are really like seen as in need of this kind of investment in infrastructure. So these are places where if you're thinking of doing work and you're in one of these states or near one of these states, or have a partnership possibility, it might be worth going to an EPSCoR webinar. They have webinars. I think they're having one tomorrow where they call it office hours, where they'll give you information about how to launch your research in these places. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen and pass on over to Julie.
All right, well, welcome. Thank you for having me here today. I am excited to talk about this just with some recent involvement in some NSF-funded projects focused in rural contexts. And I'll talk through a few of those. And my point today is really to try to share some of the challenges or experiences that we've had working in these populations. So I'm Julie Amador. I'm the Associate Dean of Research and Faculty Development at the University of Idaho, and also a professor of mathematics education. So the projects I'll talk about are grounded in mathematics education ideas. I'm going to share two primarily. So originally a group formed partnership between the University of Rochester. There are quite a few rural areas out in New York that I have learned more and more as I've traveled there and been a part of this work. A partnership between them and the University of Idaho. And so when we initially started, the plan was to provide a professional development program that was for teachers in rural contexts. And just for context, this was pre-COVID. And one of the reasons I think this got funded is and this is the project on the left, it was designed to be synchronously online. And at that time of the proposal in about 2015, there wasn't nearly as much synchronous online professional development. And the reason for that is we were finding that universities were commonly, including our own, commonly providing professional development at the university. And so teachers in these rural contexts lacked similar access to teachers in more urban areas. And so we designed this three-part professional development model in the green hexagons on the left that included a course, teaching labs, and online discussion. And what we found from the 4 years of implementing that project is that it was really well received. And I'll talk about what our partners looked like and how we recruited partners. And so we went on to realize we had similar patterns we were finding with those who were in teacher support roles. So people in coaching roles, specifically in rural contexts, were often isolated, so lacked access to other coaches. Sometimes, for example, in the state of Idaho, we have 6 different regions that the state's broken into, and one mathematics specialist in each of those, so that person's serving a lot of rural contexts, but they don't have a lot of partners in that space. And so the project I'll talk about mostly today, highlighting these rural aspects, is the Sync On for Coaches project, where we're focused on providing professional development, again, synchronously online, but to coaches through one-on-one video coaching cycles, an online course, and video coaching clubs, which is similar to a video club in an in-person context. So I want to spend some time talking about partners. And I know as we were preparing for this, there are a lot of questions about how do you come up with partners? What do partners look like? And I think as I delve into this research, and we currently just had a third funded NSF proposal on rural communities where we're trying to look broadly across the country. But with all these projects, one of the aspects that's come up is how do we recruit people in these rural areas to provide professional development, but also for research purposes. So we have found in our group that partnerships have been really essential. And so what I mean by that is, I'll talk through here, you can see our school partners are in the upper left. So we have many different states represented that we have coaches from those states. But before I jump into that, which I'll talk more on the next slide, I think a lot of it starts with the partnership of the university. So our two universities and the team we pulled together, we were very strategic in doing so. So Jeffrey Chopin is the PI at University of Rochester. I am here at University of Idaho. But we tried to draw on the resources we already had, some existing, some not as much existing, to really kind of build out this project. So you can see our project team listed. And we have people who were experts both in the Idaho site when we started and the New York site who fully did professional development and had contexts and contacts, excuse me, in the schools in these rural areas. So let's talk about our partners a little bit. We were looking for schools far from urban centers. And just as was mentioned, we're finding in this research that the definition of rural varies. And then we're running into very practical constraints too of if we look at certain definitions of rural and remote, some of our schools are an hour and a half from students' homes or teachers' homes because that's where they can get enough people to bus in. And so these are very rural areas, and not all of them are, but thinking about what that takes and what that looks like for coaches and teachers. Again, as I mentioned, we're finding that people in these areas often lack the access to traditional forms of professional development. And as there's been advances since COVID, even more so, I think there's a lot more movement online, which I'm sure you're aware of. So our participants, a lot of them have reported feeling isolated or alone. They've reached out to want to participate when they've had the opportunity because of the opportunity to connect, to have that thought partner. At the same time, I'm going to say this hasn't been without challenge as we've faced often when we go into smaller districts, I don't even like saying when we initiate conversations, we need to visit these districts. We need to talk to administrators. We need to be there with them. And if we have time at the end, I can talk more about how we've done that. But that's been key to establishing these partnerships is it's been a little bit different because in a lot of these contexts, they aren't as familiar with the university. They don't know the people here. And so getting an email that says, hey, we want to come do research in your school doesn't go over well. So it's been a lot of building relationships, one piece at a time and drawing on connections. I'm going to talk a little bit about shared goals. So I think one thing that has led to some established productive relationships has been talking with these school districts. And when I say districts, I use that loosely. We have one-room schoolhouses where we have K-8 and it's one teacher. We have districts where there's one school. We also have rural districts where they might have one elementary, one middle grade school, and one high school. So it's looking very different. So please understand I'm using that term loosely. But we've had these shared goals. And so for this project specifically, there was an underlying theme in that gray box of noticing. So we wanted to notice salient coaching practices and the impact on teachers' thinking, which we found coaches in these rural areas were interested in. What should they be paying attention to? In the upper right, we found that there was a concerted effort to have this focus on how do you facilitate a productive planning and debriefing conversation with a teacher in a coaching cycle if you're supporting them. And then in the lower right, how do we use evidence of teacher learning to make decisions? And we have found that this has come together to really be this idea of in these rural contexts and on our team, we have this shared goal of how do we support teachers with ambitious teaching practices. So looking at what we're doing, I showed this briefly, but we have these three key components where we're getting at different angles of how do we support coaches. So one-on-one piece, a small group piece, and a larger group piece. And we have found that with professional development structured in those three ways, the rural partners are able to then collaborate one-on-one with one of our project team personnel. They're able to collaborate in a small group where they're really building community with other coaches who are in similar rural contexts. And while I say similar, again, I put that in quotes because we know that no two rural contexts are the same, and I want to be mindful of that. And then we have a larger group where we'll have a cohort of teachers or coaches who are participating collectively in this professional development. And in that way, we're able to draw on a lot of experiences, a lot of backgrounds, to really have a firmer understanding of what's going on in different cultural areas and these coaches are then able to form partnerships and learn from experiences of others. So the key players in this, I think the main is these coach participants. So these are the people who we are working with. They've become part of our project. And then I think one unique thing on our research side, as we think about how are we disseminating this to NSF and the broader context in math education, is we have a professional development team within our group, and we have a research team, and we have people who cross both of these boundaries. So the people who are doing the professional development are also involved in the research, those in the research involved in the professional development. What this looks like a little bit for our partnership and research trajectory is this idea of design-based research. And we initiated this in our first Sync On project and have carried it over into the second one. And put briefly, it's this basic idea of we're trying the professional development with the first cohort, researching it, trying to figure out what we can change or modify for that second cohort based on what we're finding. And in the rural context, this has proven to be very beneficial for us. So I'll show you an example in the next slide, but we have constructed our theory of action around some of the work of Sandoval and the idea of conjecture maps. So we're articulating our model, guiding our research with this idea of explicitly articulating how theoretical features of the learning environment in which we're in are leading to desired outcomes. So we're looking at four main elements here, and I'll give you an explicit example on the next slide. But we have a high-level conjecture about the learning context, so in the rural area and how it supports learning. We then think about the embodiment of the learning design. And so what is the learning environment that's going on? We're thinking about the mediating processes that produce the desired outcomes. So what are the practices from the learning environment that may lead to what we're ultimately wanting? And when I say we, going back again to this partnership, so these coaches partnering with our research team, partnering with our professional development team, all leading to these desired outcomes. And so in theory, we're conjecturing that these designed online learning environment, including the tools that we're using, such as Zoom, other synchronous and asynchronous elements in the learning context, are going to result in these mediating processes. And from that learning environment will then lead to our outcomes, essentially taking our theoretical conjectures and seeing how they come into action in the school context. So here's an example from the Sync On for Coaches project. So our high-level conjecture was that coach participants would transform their coaching practices by engaging in collegial and structured interactions through our online video-based model. So that leads to embodiment, which is the learning environment. So we're thinking about what tools and materials do we have? What are our task structures? What are our instances of coaching looking like? What are the participant structures? So again, I talked about that a little bit, but that smaller group, that one-on-one, is it synchronous? Is it asynchronous? And then what are the discursive practices? So those discussions around coaching experiences. Then that leading into the mediating processes. So how are coaches using non-evaluative discourse to analyze coaching practice? How are they identifying connections between teachers' practices and coaching moves? And then how are they justifying coaching decisions in light of their goals for, and we use the content-focused coaching model. So all this to say, we're thinking about this on our research team. We're working with our professional development team on this. We're modifying this conjecture map, and then ultimately leading to these outcomes, which is establishing trusting relationships with our participants, including those who are coaching the coaches and the coaches, productively leading, planning, and debriefing meetings using the coaching model that we focused on. We're wanting to attend to what teachers say and make responsive coaching decisions based on interpretation and evidence, and then using evidence from coaching cycles to transform our coaching practice. And as we've done this and thought about these conjecture mappings and this idea, it has continually been something that we've gone back to the participants, we've gone back to our data. And I stress this in the sense that we have found in rural contexts, it's really important to have these conversations and to design the professional development alongside those with whom we're serving, in a sense to create this partnership and not be this outside entity from the university that pretends we have this great plan and can come in and just implement it. So in wrapping up and thinking about the last couple of points I want to make, there's obviously strengths and challenges in these contexts. If you go to the gray lower left side, we have found some schools are eager for support. We're also on the realistic front. I'm recruiting for another project that's rural based right now, finding that some of these areas are having a lot of pushback based on school boards, different legislation in different states that's going on. And so that's a reality. Just as a prime example, I reached out to one district this week and they said, well, even for a letter of interest, we would need to have permission from our school board, which is something that we traditionally haven't faced probably in the last 10 years that I've been recruiting in rural contexts. So we're seeing some evolution there. On the flip side, we reached out to another rural school where the district is the school, and immediately got a reply that superintendent / principal was fully on board. So a lot of variability there. We have found that in the rural context, there's a lot of appreciation for the collaboration, knowing that that's not often as prevalent in other areas. And then they're afforded new thought partners. At the same time, I think in the yellow, we know there's so many demands on teachers, coaches in rural contexts. Often you have that person is working in the cafeteria at lunch, honestly here driving the bus, getting the kids to school, then teaching math. So what does that look like? There's also funding concerns for positions. So limited access to resources for coaches we've run into sometimes in rural areas. And so I think one of our goals is leading to positive outcomes for teachers, coaches, and researchers, and we've been able to do that. Obviously not without stumbling blocks and not without learning quite a bit. And I also want to position myself with this talk as I have so much more to learn, and I'm excited for the other two talks to hear what they have to say. So the last slide I have is there's a QR code there that links to a Google Doc that has a listing of some of the publications and dissemination that have come out from this project. And on that Google Doc, you will be able to see the links and link right to those. I'm also happy to answer questions via email. And I know we have time at the end. So I will stop sharing there.
Thank you so much, Julie. That's so interesting. I am very excited to hear now from Rebecca.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my slides here. Hopefully, can you guys see that? Okay, perfect. So I'm Rebecca Sansom. Sorry about my voice. I thought I was okay. But I've been getting over a cold, so I sound a little funny. But anyway, I'm from Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, and I am really excited to talk about this 3D RST project. It's a collaboration with Utah State University as well. Just to give you a context a little bit about Utah, on the left here, we have this sort of population density map, and there are various definitions of rural, but according to just population density, the only county in Utah that is not classified as rural is Salt Lake County. So all of the others are classified as rural, and some of these sort of lighter green ones do have cities in them, but also a lot of not city area. And we have within the state 4 regional service centers that are set up to serve those rural areas. You'll notice like Box Elder and Tooele County here are also rural. They don't have a service center, but they are also sort of the same kind of conditions over there that we have in the other rural parts of the state. So when we started this work, it was in the context of having new science standards within the state based on the next generation science standards. Of course, they're our own. We made them ourselves. They're not from any federal organization. Anyway, we have new standards, and I over the years been involved with the State Office of Education and Professional Development and different things going on around the state. And essentially, I found that these people, we call it the Wasatch Front, this little sort of densely populated area here, is that those districts all had professional development for their teachers. And in these outer regions, not only did they not have professional development, they often didn't have anyone that was even like a science specialist. So like in this northeastern region, for example, not only is there like not a science specialist in any of those districts, there's not a science specialist in the region. So there's very little capacity for doing something like a science-specific professional development program. So we were sort of considering all of these things and decided that this was something that we wanted to help with, and got together and wrote the proposal for this. We actually, our project is using technology. It's a little bit different than the way that Julie described her project, but we sort of applied for this in the middle, before COVID, and like as COVID was just sort of happening. So I think we got lucky, and maybe the technology piece was something that people were interested in, especially you know, during that time. So anyway, what we wanted to do was increase the capacity for 3D science teaching among these rural secondary science teachers. And again, they didn't have access to professional development. Some of them knew there were new standards. Some of them didn't know there were new standards. Some of them had heard of 3D science. We have one teacher who helped write the standards in physics. He was on the committee at the state level. So like some of them have been involved in various things over the years. But the vast majority of our teachers, teacher participants came through alternative routes to licensure, didn't come through a teacher preparation program, and also didn't know anything about 3D science when they started. So our goal is really to create and develop those professional support networks among these teachers who are isolated, teaching out of their certification area, having too many preps. We have one teacher who teaches science and social studies and wood shop. And you know, like that's just the way it is. It's normal for these teachers. So, and our goal really when we started was to be very careful about the way that we partnered with teachers, because I think it's common for us to think about rural spaces as being sort of deficit spaces. And that does not mean that rural teachers are deficit teachers. They didn't know anything about 3D science, that's true, but they know a lot about a lot of other things. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about the cool things that we've discovered working with them. So, you know, the partnership that we had was originally between our universities and then these 4 regional service centers. The regional service centers wanted to increase teachers' skills. They wanted to increase retention of teachers in those schools. And they also wanted to connect these alternative route teachers to a course that they need for licensure. And so our goal was to understand whether this model of professional learning, we call it technology-mediated lesson study, supports those things. And so we had sort of unique goals on that front, but we felt like this is going to make a good synergy. Our goals are consistent with your goals, and we can help each other. I do want to share, this is a QR code just linking to, this is our first publication. We're still, this is like year 2. We're pretty young, I guess, in our project, but we've described this process that we used of technology-mediated lesson study. So feel free to take a look at that. I won't talk a lot about that. I'm going to probably spend a little bit of time on this slide. So this is talking about kind of the people who are involved here, and then how this has evolved over time. So initially, I'm the PI here. So our university is kind of located here in the middle of the state, and then Utah State is up here. So most of the PIs here, we have one PI from Utah State. And then I started, and I had been working with Utah State Office of Education. So I had some connections there. And I wasn't aware when I started doing this of the 4 regional service centers for rural schools. So those may exist in your state. They do exist in a lot of states. We at our university had a partnership with sort of local school districts that has been in existence for 30 years, where they, you know, help with student teaching placements and stuff like that. So the 2 people that I went to when I started thinking about this were my contact at the State Office of Education, the science specialist there, and then our on-campus director of that program, to see like, what do we know about any of these rural school districts. So they got me in touch essentially with the directors of these regional educational service agencies that are located in those 4 regions. we went through the process of describing the project. I met with them on Zoom. I didn't meet with them in person initially, but I met with them on Zoom. I talked to them on the phone. The different regions, it's been really interesting to work with them because they have very different kind of philosophies about how they get things done. One region won't approve anything without all of the superintendents from that region getting on board with everything first. And other regions have sort of a more sense of an autonomy with that regional service center and the work that they do, and they can kind of make decisions on their own, and like the superintendents are on board with that. So it just kind of depends how that works. In between writing the grant and then getting the grant, one of the regional service centers lost their director and got a new director. So I was sending emails into the void, and like they didn't get responses. Thankfully, I knew the regional service center directors in the other regions, and they often work together. So they helped me get connected again with the new director in that region. And the next year, the science specialist at the State Office of Education moved to actually a district science specialist position, and we got a new person at the Utah State Office of Education. That mattered a lot for us because we did set this up as a course that counts for licensure for alternative route people. So we needed to make sure that we were on board. We got reconnected with them. I would describe these initial connections that I made as like by hoofing it, you know, like I went out there and I found the people and we made it happen. And also as a consequence, these connections were weak. So as we got started, and it started to be like, oh, we need some things from you now. Like, we're going to need your help with recruiting teachers. Then people were like, well, we can't really send out emails to everyone, you know, we can send it to the superintendent, you know, and then the superintendent can do it. And it was like a lot less enthusiasm than they had when we were initially getting started. In any case, the regional service centers in our first year did connect us with one science teacher leader in their region. So that was sort of selected by the regional service center as a person that they thought would be good at this and, you know, contribute. And the good news is we got them connected to each other, and we connected with them in that first year. And so as time has gone on, we've had the ability to sort of build networks among teachers. This has expanded since that time to more teacher participants. And so we've had the ability to connect teachers and connect to teachers directly. And we've had less reliance on those regional service centers, although we still need them for some things. So that's kind of this, it's kind of a long story, but that's sort of the story, I guess, of how we came together. We are providing PD for teachers that those regional service centers can't provide by themselves. And we're helping their teachers, also building capacity among those teachers so they can continue the effort after the grant ends. They help us connect with the teachers and recruit participants, and we report back annually on how the project is going. That's been one of the really cool things for me, is like going to those board meetings and sharing some of our data. So we have the Utah Rural Schools Association conference that happens annually, a thing that I didn't know existed, again, before this started. We've also started doing regional workshops where we go out to the regions, and we can provide like a day-long PD for teachers in that region. It's sort of like a recruiting activity for us, but really cool things happen out there. Like, we'll be at a district office, and the teachers are walking out of the district office, and the superintendent, who knows them, hears them talking about how, oh, that was a great PD day. We learned so much today. And now that superintendent is like on board with things. So like being in the place and being with the people is really important. I come to those board meetings for the regions. I send emails, I have phone calls. I know these people. I know the directors. And so that makes a difference, just sort of being there. And also the connections are tenuous. And so having multiple connections, knowing the teachers directly, having teachers connected to each other, that matters. So our research is, we're looking at these networks of teachers. So this first map, sociogram, shows this is 108 rural chemistry and biology teachers in those 4 regions. It's divided up by regions. And this was prior to their participation in our program. The squares on here are people who are participants. It's kind of hard to see, but you know, like this one's a square. That's a participant in our first cohort. And then circles are non-participants. So this was sort of the baseline advice network that we had before we started our project. And after the first year, we had 12 participating teachers. And this is what we saw in 2023. So one of the really amazing things is, like, the partnership gave us access to the teachers who could participate in the PD, but also they are leveraging those teachers to now lead PD within their district and within their region. And so we're starting to see connections even beyond the connections that we might expect from their participation, because the regions are aware of these teachers and the skills that they have. I want to talk about the strengths and challenges of working in rural places. So one thing that I think I expected maybe, but underestimated the power of, is the fact that these teachers are embedded in their communities. All except one of our teachers actually lives in the town where they teach. And they have a deep understanding of their students' experiences. In some cases, you know, they're teaching all secondary science and they see these kids for 6 years. They know their families. They know what their science fair project was 3 years ago. They know a lot. They are resourceful and creative, and they have a lot of interesting scientific backgrounds. We have multiple people, and we have one teacher who is actually an alfalfa farmer currently. He does alfalfa farming on the side of his teaching. We have another teacher who participated last year who was a mink farmer, and the mink farms went down during COVID, and he had to find another job, and he got a job teaching science. We had a teacher also from last year who actually had a PhD in molecular biology. And for family reasons, his wife's family was from this small town in Utah. He moved back to this small town and got a job teaching science. So really interesting people, and they know so much. There's also really rich opportunities for place-based science, just accessing, you know, the National Forest has soil scientists that work nearby. We can bring them into the classroom. There's a lot of really great opportunities for that. And the other thing, and I think Julie mentioned this as well, just like, I don't know whether you've encountered this, but sometimes working with like urban and suburban teachers, they're kind of like, ugh, PD, like we have too much PD, we don't want anymore. And the rural science teachers have been like, yes, please, we would really love some PD. And so that's been like just a joy to work with them. The relationships are hard. I know a lot of people that submitted questions in advance, that was something that they were sort of interested in. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes probably some personality characteristics that I'm not always the best at, like I'm just being nice. It said like a variety of things that you have to work on. We emphasize though in the project building relationships among the teachers. So like we're not necessarily central to the experience that the teachers are having. They're having experiences with other teachers. The long distances make in-person work difficult and rare. We do have in-person meetings where everyone comes together, like at BYU. And thankfully, we're sort of in the middle of the state and that helps. But some teachers have to drive for 5 hours. Sometimes there's snow. Sometimes there's stuff going on that makes it hard. We do use technology for most of our meetings. And then we also have a variety of experience among teachers, some and 3D science knowledge. So we try to build teams with diverse experience so we can leverage that. I want to give a shout out to the team here, my PIs, grad students, postdoc, and the National Science Foundation, of course. Thank you for funding our project. My email is here. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those at the end.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was super interesting. You have a question in the chat if you want to try in the Q&A rather, if you want to answer it online, or we can wait to the Q&A at the end. Reminder just to all the participants to please put your questions in the Q&A. And we're going to go with Ryan now.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to join all of you. And I feel like I'm in a very privileged position that I got to listen to everyone else first. And they have talked about so many of the things that I'm going to hopefully connect to and build on. So my name is Ryan Summers. I'm an associate professor of science education at the University of North Dakota in the Department of Teaching, Leadership, and Professional Practice. And I'm going to be talking about mostly one project during our time together today. And this is a DRK-12. The longer title focuses on investigating how combining intensive professional development and modest supports affect rural elementary teacher science and engineering practice. But really, to maybe simplify things and to get into some of the nitty-gritty details of working in rural spaces, that is the focus of the webinar today. I can really simplify it like this. We have one part of the project, the research part, that we kind of refer to as modest supports. And then we have this other part where we are actively working and providing professional learning and supporting teachers, that is kind of the STEM strong piece. And so on some of my slides, I've tried to make it really clean that whether we're speaking more to the research side or the STEM strong side, but the reality is they are both fairly intertwined. And this project was born out of two previous NSF funded works that were mostly done in California, providing professional learning to teachers and providing PD. And really one of the big findings that continues to inspire and make us think deeply about professional learning that we provide teachers is that there are numerous projects out there that seek to do some sort of professional development. What often happens is teachers participate, and the worrisome thing is that sometimes a few years later, those wonderful things that they learned, they start to diminish. Maybe they go back to teaching the way they were previously prior to any intervention, things like that. And so what Kathy Ringstaff and Judith Sandholtz had done is they found that certain supports were really effective in kind of combating the diminishing return of PL. And so that we have really tried to take their model of this conceptual framework around professional learning by providing teachers with an intensive dose of professional learning that may change their self-efficacy and instructional practices. But after the initial PL is to really add some small electronic supports, what we call modest supports, to try to extend those impacts. And really, this ports wonderfully into rural communities in our mind, because we are able to gather teachers, provide PL that is relevant to whatever their needs might be. And in this case, it's going to be around science at the and engineering at the elementary level, but then staying connected and providing some context specific supports to continue to get them, moving forward in their professional journey. And so I'm going to very briefly, like others, talk a little bit about the research side of things, but I know the focus is going to be on the partnerships. But we have kind of four overarching research objectives, and we are narrowing on the end of year 2 of our current funded project. And you can see that really looking at professional learning, looking at teachers, specifically the engineering specific instruction and impacts on student learning. These are all really things that the prior studies had done to some extent, and we are scaling that up. But really, for today's conversation, I think the big picture is this sustainability with modest supports looks at, the idea that school contexts, they vary considerably. And this includes differences in teacher science instruction after participation in professional development, and reflect those variations. And so when we are thinking about rural teachers or teachers that are in smaller schools, rural communities, places like that, thinking about how much their contexts vary. Some of the other speakers on the panel today have talked a little bit already about teachers that might be the only elementary teacher, or I'll also add that we work with teachers who work in departmentalized elementary schools where maybe they only teach math or science all day, but others are grade level specific teachers. About 25% of the teachers I work with are multi-grade teachers. They teach blended classes of maybe 3rd and 4th grade together. And we definitely have some that teach in more like a one-room schoolhouse environment. And so really some of their specific contexts may adjust what kinds of supports they would need to be successful with whatever the PL would be. And so at this point, I'll talk a little bit, and this is Lonnie truthfully shared some of the big picture overview of rural at the very beginning. But what I am going to highlight, I'm working with 4 states. So I'm here as the PI of a current project, and I am located in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And when we were putting together this proposal, one of the things that we really tried to do was to talk about rural with North Dakota, but also our other state partners, California, Montana, and Wyoming in mind. And all of us, kind of like as we've jested that there's many definitions of rural, certainly, there are also just what does it really look like? And to give people maybe an idea of what this looks like is really important. And that would be something that, like, if you were a reviewer and you are from not a rural space and never been really to a rural space, to help them understand what these communities might look like. And I'll be really honest with all of you. So I'm faculty at the University of North Dakota. I grew up in Southern Illinois. The rural that I grew up around in Southern Illinois looks very different than the rural I now work in North Dakota. And so I think as I have worked with our group, and one of the things that we do as a research team now, every year when we come together once a year for an in-person team meeting, we over the last couple of years, we've tried to learn more about what rural looks like ourselves in these different spaces. So we spent a year, and I thought it was so cool as a former high school biology teacher when we went to California and they took me to a rural place, but it was really citrus fields, and they had citrus farms. I would have loved to have taught high school biology and life cycles with citrus outside my door, and instead I was surrounded by corn. And corn, cool life cycle. Some of you may be really more interested in corn, but it was all that I had. Whereas fruit seems much more colorful. Then this past fall, we went to Wyoming. In Wyoming, when we visited a small school that had 3.5 staff members. And if you wonder how do you have a half staff member, it was a person that spent half their day at that school and half their day at a different school. But it was very, very different rural environments. And so I think that's not only important for something that you can help others that might be learning about your project to better understand, but also I think it's really important that the research team develops an understanding of what rural might mean in these contexts. So for our partnership, where we are working with teachers across these 4 states, we kind of have this shared vision all built around that we are all learners, that we will get farther working together, and that students really are at the center of our work. And those pieces, really, we tried to work with our participating teachers when we spent our first PL with them, which everything that we do with our teachers is online. When we spent our first PL with teachers, we worked on developing this shared vision. Many of them, as others commented, we did a lot of cold calls and recruitment. And so the first time that they got to interact with us really over Zoom and really start to get to know us, we wanted them to know that we were committed to building a relationship with them. And so in all 4 of our states, we are all have science standards that are mostly aligned with the next generation science standards. California was a lead state, and so they had maybe some different opportunities for teachers, but the other 3 states, there's not been any kind of statewide initiatives really to help teachers. And so we were able to attract teachers into the project originally because we were going to be offering some targeted PL. But the next steps, like keeping them involved, and we had to try to offer some things that we thought would be helpful. And then, as I'll talk more about in later slides, we really wanted to showcase that we were receptive and open to listening to them and their needs. So, as I mentioned, everything that we've done with teachers has been online. I think personally, and I think many of us on this call today would agree, online access is a great equalizer, honestly, for rural communities that we can reach. North Dakota, something I didn't know prior to moving here, but has really good internet infrastructure. Some of our other states, maybe not as much, but we planned for that, and we were able to plan for hotspots and things like that. But truthfully, the online connectivity has been better than we could have hoped. An earlier version of this project, we planned to do some mix of in-person and online, but we were working on various iterations of this during COVID and at the tail end, and we made the decision to move everything wholly online. The teachers are very comfortable with things. We've found creative ways to keep things lively and to keep them engaged. And all in all, I would say that it is wonderful. And I know there's a couple recent reports that speak to this as well about why rural matters, and that the internet divide and the concerns over rural internet access are definitely lessening. But if you know your communities, you may still have areas where that's a struggle. But I will say for us, it has worked well. To give you all just a snapshot of what a year looks like with this program and kind of the STEM strong piece with our teachers, over summer 23, we spent 5 days of online intense PL with teachers. And kind of our summer institute, they had asynchronous homework, they had time synchronous with us on Zoom. And then during the year, we had essentially created online professional learning communities of these rural teachers, and we mix them up. They have groups where we meet just in-state teacher teams, and then we have times when we meet as the whole group and we do things all together. There's also some pieces within this model where we are providing guided support to help them to deliver engineering and science lessons. Because we are working with 4 different states, we are very curriculum agnostic, I guess is the phrasing that I'm going to use here with everyone. Sometimes other research on professional learning would say it works really well when everyone agrees on what curriculum to use. That wasn't a realistic expectation with 4 different states and so many different schools and districts involved. So we definitely take that stance, and we try to give them lots of resources that they can use. And then a big part of our research, really starting next year, is going to be to really inventory what kinds of supports that they have found the most useful and have been the most beneficial in changing their practice. And so I'm really fortunate to we have a huge team, truthfully. We essentially we have, but with the 4 states involved, maybe a little different than what Julie shared. We have essentially state leads and co-PIs that help to supervise the recruitment of teachers and be a point person for some communications within states. So whereas I have myself in North Dakota, and I'm joined with Julie Robinson, and we were great to have postdoc Minjung Lee, as well as a graduate research assistant, Maria Zaman. In Montana, we have Becky Hammock and Tugba Boz, who started the project at Montana State University, but have since moved to Purdue. And then we have in California, we have our Wested team, including Kathy Ringstath, Ashley Iveland, and Megan Macias, and John Galiski as a graduate research assistant. And then in Wyoming, we have Martha Inouye as a co-PI and Natalie Johnson as a GRA. And we have a wonderful advisory board as well. And so a lot of our activities we've been able to divide among different state leads. People take different leadership roles. The Wested side in California has within it the K-12 Alliance that has provided a lot of online PL. So we had really extensive expertise that was able to bring in and do the PL. And that early on, that was critical because it freed up the state leads to be recruitment points for teachers within the states. So essentially, this would have looked very different if we were simultaneously building from nothing a PL that we were planning. Instead, we were able to work collaboratively with a group who was going to take the lead over parts of the PL, and we got to focus on what recruitment strategies made the most sense in our states. And so with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about, just to give you a geographic representation where the stars show where the teachers are at in North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, and then the boxes show where our different institutional partners are, for the most part, save our advisory board and a few others. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience more specifically in North Dakota. And so, like Rebecca shared, North Dakota has regional education associations, REAs is what we call them. And North Dakota is divided into 8. I would say some of them are more loosely groups of collaborations than others. So some have more of an administrative structure, and where I'm located in Grand Forks County, shown on this map, and we have just a fantastic representative with our local REA person. She was able to help point me in the right direction early on, how to connect with others, invite me to a meeting with all of the REA directors that I was able to share information about our project. And that was one of the first ways that I was able to share broadly information with, an open call essentially to recruit teachers and partners. I also, as you know, a little bit of luck involved. I'm not going to pretend that it was anything different. A little bit of luck. I happened to be at a meeting, someone else that was looking for professional learning opportunities from our North Dakota Department of Public Instruction, and we met for the first time. And that became another important in, is that I worked with two folks from the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. They put information about our project in a newsletter blast that they do and to reach teachers, and they really helped us with their online presence as well. And then I'll also say Lonnie started off kind of our presentation today talking a little bit about EPSCoR. North Dakota is an EPSCoR state. And not only that, I've been involved with a Track 1 EPSCoR award during my time at the University of North Dakota, where I work with rural student teachers. And so because of my work with EPSCoR, and they serve as a state office, they were willing to help kind of boost the signal, so to speak, in our recruitment efforts. And so for those of you that might be listening on this call that maybe are in an EPSCoR state, I strongly encourage you to reach out, because often my experience has been that office is not just, even if it's located physically at a university, where ours happens to be on the campus of NDSU or North Dakota State University, it really is meant to serve a jurisdiction, and they might be able to help communicate information that would be of interest to teachers in the jurisdiction or other rural partners. And so these were some of the ways that I think really helped us. And then just to give you a sense, what rural looks like for us, this heat map essentially shows the initial teacher impact of all of our teachers that participated in our summer 2023 institute. And you can see starting in the upper left in your screen, Montana, and then to the right, North Dakota, below that being Wyoming, and then again to the bottom left, California. I'll speak for North Dakota in the upper right, saying you can see we really have teachers all across the state, everything from the eastern side of the state closer to the university and things like that. But we really worked hard to get teachers all the way across, reach out to rural communities. And in the western side, you're in the Bakken oil field. Some of the example slide that I shared earlier about what that looks like, and that's a very different kind of rural environment. And so lastly, I'll just take a moment to end. Some of my strengths and challenges really resemble some of the comments that Rebecca made. So the things that I'm going to highlight that maybe haven't come up or I haven't heard as plainly, I'll say that not only are teachers excited to participate in professional learning and be a part of a professional learning community in many of these rural places, I've found that many of them have much more control over their curriculum and science lessons, which is huge. If you have any kind of work that you're doing where you're going to be asking teachers to maybe do things a little differently than they have done, their agency over what they can do in the classroom is a huge boon to your cause. And so I would also say that our teachers in our project, I'm not going to put anyone else's teacher down, but our teachers are fantastic. They are some of the best cheerleaders and supporters of our work of compared to our research team or anyone else. They are just as likely to recommend colleagues who they think would be a great fit for this. They share things about us. They are excited and proud, and they just do a wonderful job assisting with the communications around our work. In terms of challenges, and I think there's many that we could speak to, and some of these may come up in the questions, but I think that one of the things here, and I'm going to say specifically from all of this being online, I mean, some of the work that we are doing is akin to running a large online enrollment course, right? So everything from managing online interactions to making sure folks can log in and get, if you think of tech support and you think of emails and all these pieces, there are a lot of pieces to this that are, simply put, it's work, and it's very different than a version of a project that it says, okay, we come together for 4 hours of PL and then I don't see you again. It's like anything. It's, in a sense, it's like working with students and others, wherein I get emails for, hey, can you reset my password for my Google Classroom? Or, hey, I can't find the link to that. And so we've definitely, it's made us be smarter about how we try to communicate and try to organize information to minimize the amount of, logistics and other, just email question answering that we'd have to do. But that's maybe not as specific of a rural thing, but given that we're using online to reach rural communities, I think it really closely intertwines. And so I think I'll end it there. I will put up, we have a few posters and papers that are coming out just this year, and I would be happy to share this information with anyone in attendance. And you're always welcome to reach out to me, check out our project website, or follow us on social. Thank you.
That was great, Ryan. Thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating set of presentations. I just want to thank our panelists before we even get into the Q&A. My mind is going a million miles, and I hope we get a lot of questions here. If you are a participant, go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We have a couple to start with. The first one I think Rebecca answered by typing, but I want to go ahead and pose it to Julie and Ryan as well. Heidi writes, I understand that online professional learning is key to providing access to rural teachers and connecting them with peers who might be far away. In what ways have the panelists thought about their planning for the PL, and what important pieces of PL that you can't achieve virtually, and how you factored that reality into your planning for strong PL experiences for your educators? So maybe everyone can take a moment. Maybe we could start with Julie and then Ryan and oh, I'm sorry, you haven't answered this one, Rebecca. We'll go back to there's another one. Okay. And Rebecca, you can answer this one too.
Yeah, so Adrienne asked about how they're funded. I actually think it's interesting, and I don't know how these regional service centers work in other states. And I don't think I knew the answer to this question before you asked it. So I was like, I'll answer at the end because I'm going to look that up real quick. But basically, they're funded by the state legislature without going through the Department of Education. So they don't exist exactly within the hierarchy of public education within the state. And they're operated kind of democratically. The districts that make up that region sort of decide what that region does. But they do help with administrative tasks that might sort of stress a smaller district where the superintendent is the principal and the soccer coach. So they do help with some of that. And I hope that answers. I'd love to know how they work in other states too. Yeah.
So we've pivoted to another question, and I'm sorry for not being clear, but yes. So Rebecca answered the question about how the regional educational service agencies are funded. So she told us how it works in Utah. Julie and Ryan, do you want to tell us how it works in the states you partner with?
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about it. It looks different dependent on content area. So in math, which I'll talk about, we have what we call the regional mathematics centers, and there's 6. Each region has a director. So I actually direct Region 1, so the 13 most northern counties in Idaho, and it's professional development and mathematics in those counties. And that has been longstanding, probably about 10 years that's been funded. And there's one director, and then there are regional specialists who are in the schools doing a lot of that work in each of those regions. So about 2 to 10 regional specialists, depending on population density. Our unique thing with math is that it is funded through statute, through a math initiative in the state of Idaho. And so the funding is funneled to the State Department of Education in Idaho. And then those funds are subawarded to the different universities. And this took quite a bit of work over the years to keep it at the universities and not house it centrally. So in contrast, science and ELA are housed, they have, I don't want to say similar models, but there are people serving these regions, but they are all housed through the State Department of Education. And we are really the pilot model in math to look at what does this look like if we house it through the university. So some of the benefits there's the research partnership, because we're able to do, and we don't do a lot of research on it, but some. But I think also the institutional knowledge of what is out there in the research that then transfers to our staff and our team here that we work really closely with. So that's something that I think it's really waffled a little bit depending on who our state superintendent is. The one we have right now has been incredibly supportive in moving forward. And so I'd only see it expanding, but it's been a great way. And that is all, not really wanting to get into the second question, but that's all in-person professional development. And so we are able to meet a lot of the needs. I wouldn't say all, I guess 90%, maybe 10% online. But we are able to be in the schools. One caveat to that is we spend thousands of dollars a month on mileage to get to those schools. So that's another piece of our budget. I mean, it really is each specialist is somewhere around $800 a month just at the federal rate of mileage to get to these places.
Wow.
So realities.
That's intense. Ryan, do you want to speak to how your regional centers are funded? North
Yeah.
Dakota, your partner.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lonnie. The North Dakota Regional Education Association, the NDREAs, are funded also through the legislation. So there isn't a, like Rebecca said, I think probably a fairly similar model. There's not a direct connection to the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction. Each REA can set like some priorities, and they do offer like professional learning. But if you go to their website right now, you would probably see that a lot of them do focus maybe more on like literacy and math, probably like broad sweeping needs, as well as like maybe like, 21st century, career choice and other like statewide initiatives. So some of these schools and or even schools in these regions really miss out on like content specific offerings, or and they just may not be as prevalent. I know there tends to be a mix, but many they try to do several face-to-face offerings, or within the region, so teachers can, it's a maybe a shorter commute, but the funding seems to be fairly similar, and it's in the North Dakota legislature and century code.
Great, thank you. Okay, now we'll pivot back to Heidi's question about professional learning and trying to figure out the balance between online and in person, given the trade-offs in terms of relationship, in terms of the kinds of content and activities you can do. Julie, do you want to take that one first?
Sure, I'll start there. I think the piece that stands out for me the most is actually the recruitment. And for us, that's had to be in person. Speaking about these math centers, we'll essentially take the beginning of the school year, call it the road trip, and travel around, stopping at different districts, meeting with administrators. They really want us face to face to get to know us. And so I think that goes the same for some of the professional learning as well. Teachers who are maybe more hesitant or are newer to the profession, we found really would rather have us in their classroom to watch. They can talk with us rather than doing something like we've done a lot of swivel, right, to look at classroom video. So I think it's the relationship piece building. And once that's been built in person, then we have an easier time moving online.
Great, thank you.
I just really agree with Julie on everything she just said. So we have sort of a hybrid. I think both of your programs are like online fully, right? So our model, our participants do come in person. Our summer workshop is in person, and we have 4 workshops during the year where everyone comes back to the university. And I think it's the same thing. We're bringing people together who literally have never seen each other in their lives. And the thing they have in common is like they teach earth science or they teach chemistry. And so we both to ground people in the same ideas and concepts about 3D science, and to really support that relationship building. That's what we do at the beginning. That's all in person. And they do great leaving from there. It's sort of like this summer boot camp that they do. And they are like best friends when they're done. And so that's been really great for that piece of like building the relationships.
Wonderful, thanks, Ryan.
So I will say, the recruitment probably for each of us looked a little different state by state. I mean, if I was going to be in a place in person, or if I could attend an event, absolutely, I'd be happy to recruit in person. But, but visiting school to school, really what we wanted was coverage across the state. We like really wanted to, make sure. And so we worked with the REAs, we asked for their suggestions and tried to reach them. And so even a lot of, I would say, the majority of my recruitment efforts were, still a lot of online focused strategies. When it came time for our summer institute, there were probably a few people that had signed up and we had a long wait list, but there were some people that really quickly decided the online maybe wasn't for them. And it's not because they didn't think they could learn that way. I think as much as I tried to tell people in our advertisements, try to tell people it was still going to require active participation, they didn't realize what active participation was going to look like. And so we definitely had, that first day and second day of the institute, I got emails saying, thanks, but no thanks. And it was because they're like, I'm trying to enjoy some of my summer still. I wasn't, I did not have plans for this. Whereas, like, probably I'm guessing somewhat similar to what Rebecca's experience with the 3D science, we were asking teachers to work together, to work through sense making, to work through data together. So, I think on our first day, we had them looking at weather data. And so it really required them to be active, attentive participants. It was not a, let's sit here and receive Zoom and I can be doing other things in the background. That was not the PL that we had designed. And so we definitely, from that stance, we had teachers that maybe decide that this wasn't going to work right now. To the original question about other things that might not work, absolutely. And we've got other parts of our project, like for example, we have teachers right now who are implementing an engineering lesson, and this is really one that they got to have a heavy hand in designing what it would look like. And they are using camera systems to record themselves teaching, and then they're going to get peer feedback. So that is something that would have been really tough to do in real time on Zoom, but it's totally still possible at a distance. It just requires planning.
I'm wondering, because you all work in rural states or rural parts of the state. And when this is like embarrassingly long ago, I think 20 something years ago, when I was at University of Washington in Seattle, I did a professional development program in partnership with our forestry department at the university for rural teachers. And there was a lot of mistrust at first, because of what you're saying about the tight insularity of the rural communities. It's a strength, right? They really know their kids. They've known them, some of the families, like their entire lives and so on. But I wonder if you have any advice for people who might be coming from what's seen as a more urban area or urban parts of the state to try to partner with rural teachers and to kind of bridge that outsiderness.
One thing, I'll keep it brief, but I don't think I've talked about much, is we try to find somebody who knows someone. I mean, when we're doing any recruiting, but then also we want to be inclusive of all places, but who do we know maybe in this region or this part of the state? Because we found that then we can get an introduction to then at least go have that conversation.
That makes a lot of sense.
And I also think like it really depends on the actual place. We have one teacher who teaches in a school that's on the Ute reservation, and it's run by the Ute tribe. They're in charge of everything. And it was different to go into that space than it was in other places that had different kinds of cultures. And so we had to be really careful and respectful in the way that we came in. As you can imagine, people, maybe especially in Native communities, have a sort of distrust of the outsider coming in and trying to change their education system. So that was the thing that we had to approach carefully. And then I think I agree with Julie. We had our contacts with the regional service centers. They got us connected to the first teachers. And like then when we got our first cohort, probably half of them knew one of those original 4 science teacher leaders and came in. So like the word of mouth has been really powerful. And I think, Ryan talked about his teachers being great cheerleaders. I think when you're providing something that's really great for teachers, like they will become cheerleaders. So I think it's really important to just consider, like, when they're coming, they're going to be engaging with that weather data. They're going to be planning lessons collaboratively. You know what I mean? Like give them something that's just like totally different than what they've experienced before.
You want to add anything, Ryan, or just kind of nodding? Yeah.
I think both of them have just talked so much. I think I feel very fortunate to be in a group of people that see rural as an asset. And I think that's a really important part of the framing. And I think one of the things that Rebecca said, treating teachers like they are experts and professionals. I think all of us, whatever your role is in connection to K-12 education, there are a lot of teachers out there right now that maybe don't always feel professional. They don't feel like they're treated professionally. And
Yeah.
I think that is a kindness that we can offer that really does go a long way to treat them professionally. And maybe a different way to think of that is that when you are working to establish these rural partners, of course you probably have a vision for your project or an intervention or something that you want to offer, but being receptive to their needs, like this isn't something like to be imposed on them, and hopefully it's something that they can maybe have some co-creation of in whatever way that looks like, and that might look different project to project.
That's really great. Yeah, I think that asset orientation and professional learning, it goes such a long way to building the relationship, getting buy-in, engaging our teacher partners. I'm curious for the participants. I see we still have 23 people logged on. For our follow-up consultation, put in the chat what kinds of topics you might want to have consultation with our panelists. I heard something about identifying partners. I heard Julie talk about going in and spending time and doing that relationship building. Rebecca talked about using the regional service centers strategically as a way of launching partnerships. Ryan was talking a lot about knowing the channels where you can reach teachers. Just recruitment seems to be a question that's coming up a lot. If you are someone who is either working on a project, a DRK-12 project that involves rural schools, or you'd like to, what kinds of conversations would you want to have in small groups with the panelists? I'll give you a moment or two to put that in the chat, and we can just sort of have an open discussion among the four of us about things that, as you're listening to each other, things that might be more of a, like the way you said, mileage is something you need to budget for. What are some of the other things that might differ in making a DRK-12 grant that is in a rural context? I mean, one of the things, Ryan, you were talking about the tech support. It made me think, wow, if I were trying to write a grant in a rural community, I might try to hire somebody for that role, because it sounds like that would be a lot and really high stakes.
I completely lucked out. Like I'll be honest, Lonnie, our postdoc, Min, came in, and within a couple of days of working with the research team, she jumped into coordinating 160 teachers in breakout rooms and everything
Incredible.
else, like a COVID era Zoom veteran. And she really was an all-star. But on the other parts of it, like what you're saying about the budget piece, Wyoming and Montana had hot spots in their budget. They didn't end up needing as many of them as they thought, but we talked about it. It's maybe still important to have that budget in there, because it's hard to tell unless you went in, like maybe what Julie's describing, unless you went in with a clear idea of the school partners you were going to work with,
Yeah.
day one. You may not know if you need hotspot support, or do you need something else. And so there are definitely some of those pieces with planning for online. But I know Rebecca put this in the chat, taking things like mileage out of your budget, or I know in our case, when we were planning a multi-day in-person professional learning, taking lodging and per diem and things like that out, it changes the budget. And so it gives you some flexibility then to think creatively about how to make it the most successful. And not just, we're not doing this and internet is cheaper. It's more like, how do we shift our budget to really match, a high quality delivery of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we didn't anticipate, and it has to do with recruitment, those like regional workshops that we've done, we didn't do initially, but we found in our first cohort, we had plans to recruit, I think we were planning to have 16 teachers that first year, and we managed to get 12, you know, so we were like, okay, that's pretty good. But like, how come we didn't have people knocking down the door, you know? And so we realized like they didn't know who we were. They didn't trust us. They didn't believe that what we were going to provide was different than anything they had experienced in other PD situations. And so we had to go into the areas, into the regions, and get the teachers like on their home turf kind of. And I think once they came and they saw what we were doing and saw the value in what we were doing, then it was a lot easier to recruit people to participate. So we had some connections where we had made relationships sort of virtually, but it matters that you're there. I think that's important when you're planning a project, because you want to think about where it's reasonable for you to be. You know, when I go down and do a workshop down in southeastern Utah, that's a couple of days. Like it takes me 5 hours to drive down there, and then we have a workshop and I've got 5 hours back. And you know, you have to plan for that kind of thing. So yeah.
That's really helpful. Julie, what's your little bit of wisdom for people planning a study in a rural community?
I mean, I think similar to what Rebecca said, it's just, I think I just keep in my head going back to the connections. And I also would encourage people to think about being patient with that. I think similar to Rebecca with recruiting, we've also had a good high number of attrition. Well, we've had some projects where we've had people really stick with it. We've had some where people have left because the demands, which I mentioned briefly. And so I think on our end, we're trying to be really cognizant of what we're asking of them, knowing that they're already in these spots with a lot going on and having to adjust that. So I guess to say something different, that's where I think there's another piece to think about too. How do you keep them in your project?
So how do you keep them in your project? What are some of the strategies you've used to keep the retention strong?
Yeah, I guess I would say just a practical one. This year, we had planned our project for 2 years, decided that we wanted to try a third year with the same participants, and went out to them and got a lot of no's. We came back as a team and realized we were asking too much on the PD and offering too low of a stipend, that balance. So and you can't do this with all projects, but upped the stipend, lowered the PD hours, and we got almost full participation. I think it had less to do with the stipend and more to do with what we were asking of them with their already full plate. Because I think with all of them saying yes, they obviously found value in the project and what they were doing, but couldn't commit to the number of coaching cycles we were wanting or the number of the frequency of meetings. And so being realistic about that, I think for us has been a big piece.
I think maybe to connect what Julie's saying, but also with a comment from the chat from Heidi, you know, I think sometimes, and I am certainly guilty of it, sometimes we underestimate the amount of time online activities take. So whether it's, you know, filling out an email, or right now over in December, we had teachers fill out instructional logs, things like that. I think one thing that we can do as researchers is try to be really accurate in estimating teachers' participation time. And then that allows us to be really, you know, thoughtful about the appropriate stipend for that amount of time. And so instead, what may happen is that it's like, well, they attend this thing and it's 4 hours, then they should get this much money. But if we can take the extra steps and say, actually, we're going to be asking them a few more things, whether that's watching video or doing asynchronous work or other pieces, then I think we position ourselves and can make, you know, better budget justifications for maybe a stipend, and that could be used for any number of things. I think stipend is still hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to that, we actually pay teachers hourly for any like non-contract hours that they're spending doing the project. And that's nice because, you know, they might use that meeting with their groups. They might use that when they're reviewing the video footage. They might use that when they're planning a lesson and they're redoing some of the things that they're going to do. They can use that, you know, if we're doing an interview with them, they document that. And so like all of that just goes into the hourly rate. And that was sort of an easier way. And different teachers earn different amounts of money because they're participating differently in the project, you know. But that's been a nice way. that we might have thought about doing a stipend. I think it's like for the year or something. And I think it's nicer to think about it as kind of hourly, in terms of having that flexibility.
It also ensures that, you know, to Heidi's point, that if they need to pay a babysitter or something, that they can account for that and they know that they're going to get reimbursed a certain amount, you know, so that seems like a good way to go for the design of your project. Well, we are at the end of our time. Thank you so much to our panelists. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm really glad that you helped us put this resource together for other folks who want to do work in rural communities. They're important places in our educational system and certainly don't get enough attention in like a lot of broader conversations about education. So I'm very grateful for what you're doing for the field, as well as what you've done for our community here. So thank you. And thank you to all our participants who joined us for this. And feel free to follow up with anybody. Everybody put their contact information out there. So hopefully you were able to catch it if you needed it. And Ryan, Julie, and Rebecca, thank you again so much. We're going to probably go bloop into the ether once the webinar ends. So I want to make sure to say goodbye and thank you. All right, everybody, we will see you again for our follow-up discussion on February 13th, right before Valentine's Day. Thank you. Bye, everybody.